Of course, that hints too at the fact that the distance to Jerusalem varied greatly from tribe to tribe. If you lived in Benjamin or Judah, for you it might be a matter of a few miles to the temple or tabernacle. But if you lived in the town of Dan, way in the north, you've got 110 miles or so to go. Of course, raises the question, what were you doing dwelling in that? Well, my ancestors didn't value the service of the Lord in their own land and wanted an easy life. So they left the territory God had given them and headed north because the Philistines were too strong for them in their unbelief. But anyway, from a few miles to 110 miles or more distance. Then weather was a factor, especially in Palestine, but not only. Heat. And the heat was particularly bad at certain times of the year. Supplies was another issue if you were going on pilgrimage, and particularly water, especially if you're journeying in the hottest times of the year, and especially if yours is a long trek. And Psalm 84 verse 6 mentions one particularly difficult place for pilgrims: the valley of Baca. And Baca means weeping. The valley of weeping. And the weeping engaged in by some, if not all, of the valley of Baca, from the context, this weeping was induced by the lack of water and thirst, especially at the hot time of the year, especially if you've quite a journey to go. And in God's providence, though we don't know where this valley of Baca or weeping was, in God's providence, He put this valley, a particularly hot place, on the way to Zion for at least some of the pilgrims. They had to go through this valley of Baca. And in God's providence, He put it there as a test or a trial to see if people were really interested and seriously desired to worship Him. Because if they weren't, they would say to themselves, well, got to go through that valley of Baca, it's very hot. I don't think we'll bother this year going up to the feast. We'll just stay at home, and God has made it too hard. It's sort of God's fault. And we'll just, I'm not feeling that well anyway, and it might be a bad idea to go. But the blessed pilgrim, you see what he does, the one in whose heart are the ways to Zion, whose strength is in the Lord, he says to himself, the valley of Baca is on my route. I will make a well in that valley, or uncover a spring, so that there is a water supply in the valley of Baca. And so I will not be deterred from coming to God's house according to His commandment. The hardship will not put me off. I'll build a well, so that I can come there, my family, and others too. So with a little bit of foresight, and with some effort, this man takes practical steps to make it to Zion. Why? Because he has the ways to God's house in his heart, because his strength is in Jehovah, and because he's a blessed man. He takes steps. And we could apply this to ourselves, that even coming up to church, we ought to do some planning and make some effort. For instance, something very simple and basic. We see to it that petrol is in the car for us on Sunday, because we don't want to break the fourth commandment by getting petrol at the local filling station and having the unbelievers laugh at us. When we go on holiday too, and we're going to be away over the Lord's Day, before we go, we make steps and do some research and find out where the best church is, where I can worship the Lord. We make plans. And this sort of planning and effort is necessary because we're dealing with a commandment of God, not some social issue, not some matters of etiquette or manners simply, but God's commandment, which far outweigh everything else God's commandment. And so we take time, and a little bit of forethought too, for others in our homes, so that our children can get to church too. If we're away on holiday or if we're sick, if at all possible, because the same fourth commandment says that we are responsible for those in our home, for our wives, for our children. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It talks about rest for your manservant, your maidservant, your sons and your daughters. God holds us responsible for this. And because too, for our children, we don't want somebody to be blessed. We want our children to be blessed. We want our children to have their strength in the Lord and to have His ways in their hearts, so that they grow up after us thinking, I need to keep the fourth commandment. That's the way of blessing, the way of praising God in His house, to be strong. So we have this verse 6. The blessed man who passes through the valley of Baca and tears, and he makes a well there. And then the rain comes and fills the pools. And God blesses his efforts, and there's enough water for the pilgrims to drink. Because, you see, these are the people described in verse 5. They have the right attitude. Nothing deters them. They seek first the kingdom of heaven. And everything else is added to them. And everything else is made subservient to this. Blessed people with strength in Jehovah, who have in their heart the ways to go up to Mount Zion. This is what we want in the congregation. Blessed spiritual members, so that the whole congregation prospers. These sorts of people described in verses 5 and 6 most certainly do grow in grace. Verse 7 says they go from strength to strength. And this could mean one of two things. It could mean that as the pilgrim band nears Jerusalem, streaming in from every side, that band grows because people are converging on this central place from all directions. And undoubtedly that was the case. That's a particularly attractive idea. They're coming up, and then the ones and twos join with others in the road, and then they swell as they go up to Mount Zion. But probably, and this is the way I and the commentators take it, this verse is speaking not so much of numerical growth and the people going up, but of the growth in grace of the individual pilgrims. They grow spiritually, each one, from strength to strength as they go on pilgrimage. They all have a common goal. We're all heading up to Zion for the ordinances of God and His public worship. And we fellowship together. And we sing the songs of Zion as we go up together too. Songs 120 to 134 especially, and Psalm 84, which is also a pilgrimage psalm, especially our text, verses 5 through 7. And in so doing, the pilgrims encourage one another. They grow, they go from strength to strength. The young ones, the middle-aged ones, and the older ones, from strength to strength. And the strength in which they grow is strength in the Lord. Blessed is the man whose strength is in thee. And as they grow in this strength in the Lord, they become more and more blessed. And this too is the goal and the desire of the church's counsel for you, your family, and the church. This is God's will too for His people. This is what He commands. This is what He demands. This is what He works in us. That we go from strength to strength as we head up to Zion.